Welcome to Ecclesia Principles, a biblical strategy for believers to engage in God's design for government with Ray Eppard.
Hello, glad you could join us again today. We're continuing to talk about the balance between self-government and centralization. Maintaining that balance is critical to maintaining a healthy culture, a healthy civilization. With this, we have seen that God gave humanity self-government, Genesis 1:26. Last week and on Monday, we saw how that God instilled in man through the command to cultivate, that created a centralization. We even see it in the New Jerusalem in Revelation 21. Now, yesterday we talked about how that as centralization increases, and it should increase, but it has to have a counterbalance, because we can improve efficiencies. You see, Henry Ford, well, let me first read from Romans 7:17. This has been our text, because a lot of what I'm wanting to talk about is how the sin nature applies to our culture. And we miss that a lot. Romans 7:17 says, "But now it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me." What Paul here is identifying is that every human being has a sin nature in our flesh. It is what encourages us to do things that we shouldn't do. That's a sin nature. Now, especially the sin nature loves power. Sin nature loves power, because when it has power, then it gets to do what it wants. The more power it has, it can do more of what it wants to do. And with that, the whole thing of government, self-government, is where you control yourself. You know, if you have good self-government, then you don't let yourself do the things that you shouldn't do. But if you don't have good self-government, then you let yourself do the things that you shouldn't be doing. You don't control yourself from that standpoint. And you see, the reason we have to do that is because of the sin nature. If we didn't have the sin nature, that wouldn't be the issue. That wouldn't be the problem that it is. But because we have this sin nature, we have to control ourselves. With centralization, which is something that really God designed, because if you take Henry Ford, you know, he made the Model T Ford, Model A, so forth and so on. He really developed the assembly line in the modern way that we have it. And with that, he made, you know, they would work on this one part, and that's all they did every day. They just did that. They just did that because it was quicker, because the more they just did that, the more efficient they got with it. They got to where they were good with it. They developed that skill. Well, it would leave them and it would go on to the next person, and they would do their one task. And so it got to where they could build the car quicker through that assembly line function. Centralization creates efficiencies that don't exist otherwise. You can't get but so good at something when you're doing everything. But when you focus on something, again, centralization is essential for specialization. Again, you can't have a brain surgeon without centralization. That person studying to be a brain surgeon has to have someone else growing their vegetables for them, making their clothes for them. Then they can go and buy it. But there is no specialization without centralization. And so that raises the standard of living. It makes life better. It's not a bad thing in and of itself. But because of the sin nature, those efficiencies, and especially in bad economic times, those efficiencies begin to pull power/money into that centralization. pulling it out of self-government, pulling it in over here. And again, that sin nature can cause people to begin to think that they're more than they really are, that they're really smarter than everybody else, and that they really, they're smart enough really to run everybody else's life and to decide what everybody else should do. And that is a lure of that power. That's something that's a lure, that's an attraction that comes with centralization. That when somebody is over that centralization and they see how effective it is and the money or power that it produces, and then they look at somebody else over here who's taking care of all of these things and therefore does not have the same money, they can begin to think that they're better than this person. But really, no, it's just some giftings are different. Opportunities could just be different. But you see, where we finished talking about last time is where I really want to go today, is the only counterbalance to centralization. Because again, the ecclesia principle is that we have to maintain the balance between self-government and centralization. The only counterbalance to the efficiencies and the power that is generated by centralization is protecting self-government. You see, so many of our issues today, I'll just be honest with you. Look at everything during COVID. COVID was a battle between centralization and self-government. That you had all of these people over here that thought they knew better than everybody else. And therefore, they began to take away people's self-government, their right to decide, their right to choose for themselves, because they know better than everybody. Well, here's the sad part, and I hope some of you are doing the same thing that I am. I'm still tracking the information that's coming out on COVID. And it is amazing. It is amazing. All the people that spoke out against the centralization of the power to determine things, their comments are now being proven through the studies that are coming out of what's happened with COVID and really how it should have been handled. And some nations have actually come out and said now that in reality, what they should have done rather than shutting down was just leave everything normal and let it play out. That it wouldn't really have been as bad as it was if they'd have just done that. Because natural immunization would have stepped in and it would have been better for what they call herd immunity. But centralization would have nothing to do with that. No, we know better. We know better. We're smarter. We're the doctor, and so forth and so on. But the only counterbalance for centralization is self-government. Because if you do not counterbalance centralization, you will wind up with a couple things. And it could go a few different ways. The most likely scenario is you wind up with an oligarchy. An oligarchy is where a small group of people run everything. They make all the decisions for everyone, the parameters. And if you would, there's some things going on in Europe right now that you should be aware of. If you would, you ought to Google the 15-minute cities. Europe is moving toward making sure there's stuff within 15 minutes of anyone's home so that during the next pandemic, you can walk and get everything you need. But also, they are implementing some new technology from China that they can tell if you've went outside your 15-minute perimeter. And ultimately, there are many that are basically saying that all of this is setting up for government to control all of your movements. And there's a lot of truth in that you have to stay here within this framework. And you see, oligarchy, See, the problem again with centralization, and we're going to get to some biblical concepts of economics. But you see, if centralization is not checked by self-government, then more and more power gravitates towards centralization. More and more power, because more and more money goes there. Therefore, there is more power there. And again, you have that small group of people who know better than everybody else running everything, directing everything, deciding everything. It's very much what the Soviet Union had with the communist leaders, small group of people directing everything. That's your most likely scenario. Another one is you end up with some kind of dictator or something like that. But that's less likely than the oligarchy. Now, with this, self-government being that counterbalance, we have to, in every situation, we have to there's an element where you should always have a healthy fear of big government. You should always have a healthy fear of big power. Why? Because of the sin nature. Because of that sin nature. Everybody is going to have that inner, it's in our flesh, that inner drive to go places that we shouldn't go, to do things that we shouldn't do. And when you get sufficient power, there's less standing in your way to keep you from going there. Self-government is the only counterbalance. And right now, so many of the issues of our day are attacking self-government. Don't let people make their own decisions. And it's being done under the guise of, well, there are some people who can't, so we need to make this rule over here for all of these people. No, no, no. Just deal with the ones that's got the problem and leave everybody else alone. That's the best way to do it. Peter put it this way: the law was made for the lawbreaker. Make laws that deal with the people that are violating things. Leave everybody else alone. Leave self-government intact. But right now, centralization is trying to really put everybody within a corral. They're trying to hem everybody in so that you function in this area. You can't do this, you can't do that. I'll just throw out, a lot of people are pushing gun control. It amazes me that everybody that seems to push gun control in politics has a group of people around them with guns. Just kind of amazes me that they've got people around them with guns, and at that point, they don't want you to have guns. The problem is, if you want to look at the places that have the worst violent crime issues, they are in the places where the strictest gun laws exist. Those things do not work, not in the way that they're approaching them, because ultimately they're not designed to work. They're designed to create power. It's really not designed to keep it out of the hands of criminals. It's designed to keep it out of the hands of good, well-meaning people, because eventually those well-meaning people may get mad at us and decide they don't want us in control anymore, so we need to make sure they don't have the means of getting rid of us. That's a lot of what's driving it. So anyway, we'll finish up here. Join us again tomorrow. God bless you.